Hey folks, welcome back. In this first of a three-part series, I'm going to show you my coloring process from start to finish. And I'm using Photoshop for this, and here's a piece that I've created. I've already penciled and inked it, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that my inks layer stands alone. It should be on a transparent background. And I want to make a layer underneath that ink layer. And it may not be a bad idea to go ahead and lock the inks layer to prevent accidentally coloring on your inks layer. That would be bad. So when I start to think about this, I want to imagine, what kind of scenario this is that's taking place. I want the colors to support the narrative. In this particular illustration, we have a young girl with her companion, little bear, looking through what looks like a spaceship or something that has a lot of wires and other doodads on it. So there's an element of mystery. It looks like she has some kind of maybe a flashlight that she's holding in her hand. So I want to accentuate some of the cooler colors in this composition. So what I'll do is I'll start out with a base color, and I'll maybe pick kind of a violet color to start out with. Option delete. And I want to make this a little bit more, kind of spooky. So I don't want the colors to be super saturated. This is a saturated purple. If I hit Command U, I can drop the saturation down, because when you saturate a color, you make the color more vibrant, more full of life. And in this particular case, I'm trying to evoke the opposite. I want this to be a little bit devoid of life. That adds to that element of danger and mystery. And while we're at it, I can also go ahead and adjust the hue. And I think maybe I might go more towards a bluish color scheme. So we can always tweak these colors as we work. I always bring up the hue saturation panel because it's a fast way to work with your colors. So now let's click OK. So the next thing I want to do is I want to analyze my foreground, midground, and background. Well, obviously we know that the space occupying the character is in the extreme background, and we have a planet that is also in the distance. So we have a background element. The girl and her companion are in the midground. And we've got some sort of cabling and wiring that is much closer to the viewer. So my thought process is I want the dark colors to be in the foreground. I want the medium colors to be in the midground, and I want the lighter colors potentially to be in the extreme background. Now it's space, so space is usually by nature very dark, so that might be the only exception here. But if I am going to have a relatively dark background around the character, I want to make sure the other colors that I pick will not cause the ship to blend in with the background. That's important. So why don't we go ahead and start off with, we've got some straight lines here. We can use the polygon lasso tool, and the lasso tool can be activated with the keyboard shortcut L. And if you hold down Shift L, you can toggle between the various lasso tools. And for these straight areas here that are in the foreground, I will make a selection that encompasses this bar that's in the immediate front. Next, I'll go ahead and hit Command J, Command U, and I'll make that darker. And right away, that creates some distance between the character and some of the other elements that are behind the bar. We also have another hose that's over here. There's actually two hoses. And I could use the regular lasso tool, but this line is thick enough to where I can get away with using polygon lasso tool. So again, going back to the base layer, Command J, Command U. I'll make that a scooch lighter. And I can also change the value a little bit too. Give it a little bit of a purplish shade. And for something like this, I could use the magic wand tool. So there's different selection tools that we're going to use. If I use the magic wand tool, it does a pretty good job, but there are some gaps that are missing. To add to those gaps, I can hold down my Shift key, and it will select those areas that have not been previously selected. I find with things that have a lot of grooves or grids or hatching, it's much easier to use the lasso tools to select the whole thing as opposed to using the magic wand tool. But this is just an exception for this time. Command J, Command U. We'll make that dark. Like so. All right, so that's our foreground elements. Now we've got our midground elements. So what I like to do is I like to divide the foreground, midground, and background into different areas. So what I can do now is, going back to this base layer, I will use a combination of my tools here. Let's see, what's the best way to do this? Well, I could use my pen tool, and I can click and drag to make a selection around my character, because I need to isolate the character from the midground, and it's going to be easier for me to do that than it would be if I were to select all of the midground elements together. So I click and I drag, and this allows me to get much more precision. Pen tool keyboard shortcut is P. And I like to think of that as for P for pen and P for precision. When you click and drag, you get a nice little arc. I'll go ahead and zoom in so you can see this a little bit better. So click and drag, and you get this nice curve. And this is a lot more precise than using the lasso tool. You can use the lasso tool, but it's, in my opinion, a little bit too loosey-goosey. That's a technical term. The pen tool is great for things like curved areas. And if you want to make a sharp point, you put two vertices really close together. These little points are vertices. So I'm going to click and drag. And what I'll be doing here is I'm creating the color flats for this video. And in my next video, I'll add my highlights. So this is a little bit more in-depth. You've seen me color before on my other videos, but I want to go ahead and be a little bit more detailed this time around in terms of my process. If you find value in this, definitely give it a like. Okay, so I've got the girl. I'm going to run into a little bit of a problem here, but I'm going to fix this while I work. So I've got her selected. I've got a little sliver that I don't really want. Not a big deal. Let's go ahead and convert this into a selection first. I'll click OK. This is a great learning opportunity here. I've made a mistake. I have a selection that goes beyond the girl. How do I fix that? Well, if I bring back my regular lasso tool, and if I hold down the Option or the Alt key, then I can make a selection for where the mistake is and deselect it. So now I've got the character fully selected. And there's a little area here that I need to, I'll deal with that later. Let's now hit Command J, and it will make her character lighter. That's not going to be her final color, but it just allows me to separate her from the other elements, and she will be the focal point. So that's the other reason why I want more emphasis placed on her. I could, tweak the colors here as well. So you have the hue, which is the color, and you have the value. The value is what is the corresponding grayscale that comes about. Now, if I zoom in here, you can see my selections weren't super precise, so I can come back in with my lasso tool and hit Command or Control X to just clean that up. It's probably a good idea to do this as you work. And then for areas that you want to subtract, you can always hit Command X. That's some negative space here. There's some negative space here. And these negative spaces allow us to get a better silhouette of our character. There's another small spot here. And there might be others, but I'm not going to worry about that too much. All right, so now that I've got the girl isolated, now I can go back to my base layer. Let's use the magic wand tool and click the area that's the space area. Let's isolate that. So I'll hit Command J, Command U, and I'm going to make that darker. So right away what's happening here is there is definitely some separation between foreground, midground, and background layers. All right, so now, since we have all of these other layers isolated, it becomes very easy for me to now adjust the midground entirely by using the base color. I can hit Command U on the base layer, and if I wanted to give this more of a purplish hue, I can go ahead and do that. Now what about all of these other bits of equipment that are going to be away from our character? So this is where another trick comes into play. I'm going to use my lasso tool, and I'm going to make sweeping selections around areas that are first of all obscured by direct light. So Command J, Command U, I can make that a little bit darker by adjusting the lightness. And then for these little spots right here, if I have closed gaps, that's great, but there might be a couple of cases here where I don't have that. So I will shift to my regular polygon lasso tool, and I'm adding the shift key to add to my selection. So shift, remember, will add to a selection, whereas option or alt subtracts from a selection. You need to know those keyboard shortcuts. So Command J, Command U, and I'll just tweak the color on this. And when we look at this in terms of a grayscale check, you will see that these values, even though they're different colors, will resolve to a similar value. Now I've got some extra area over here. I'll just make this all one big piece. Command J, Command U. We'll make that kind of blue. Make it just a little bit lighter since it's a little bit further away from the viewer. So what am I talking about with this grayscale? Well, in one of my previous videos, I talked about making a quick keyboard shortcut, and I'll put a link to that in this video, where you can toggle between color and grayscale very quickly in Photoshop. I have a keyboard shortcut assigned, Command Y, that allows me to see what my colors resolve to in terms of value. So you can see that I've got dark, medium, and light values within this particular composition. And those colors are creating depth, and they're also signifying a focal point. I want for us to look at the girl. Now, things like this planet, because I've already got layers that obscure it, my selections could be a little bit more sloppy at this stage. Go back to my base layer, Command J, Command U. I will make this lighter, but I don't want to make it so light that it's going to take us away from the main character. That's important. So if I hit Command Y, you can see that this shade right here on the astronaut is a little bit lighter, and I can make that more obvious by going to the astronaut layer while I'm in grayscale, Command U, and just tweak her lightness a little bit more. So these are all important checks. It's not just picking arbitrary colors. I'm thinking about how the colors will create a sense of atmosphere and create a sense of a narrative for the story that I'm being, trying to convey here. All right, so now that I've got that in place, I can now focus on isolating and putting colors together. So I want her color, her outfit to kind of have a mix of oranges and blacks with some yellows thrown in there, because that just kind of makes her stand out a little bit more, and it kind of looks more like a spacesuit. So I'm going to the astronauts layer. I'll just go on the layer above that, Command, I've already picked my orange. It's one of those rare occasions where I go to the swatches panel, by the way, and I'll fill that in. And I'm repeating these color schemes. Repetition allows us to move through the composition, and it allows us to associate something that is either uniform or something that is consistent for this character. So here's a gap that I didn't fill. So that's your orange, and I've got those on a separate layer so I can always adjust it. Maybe I like that, more yellow-orange look. I think that looks better. Okay, and then, so for the rest of her suit, let's see. There's a little stripe that's going down that I don't want to miss. If you over select, you can always hit undo. So I'll pick kind of a yellowish color scheme there, put that on its own layer. And this will become more apparent as we get into the other stages. So here I'm making a selection. Do I want this to be part of it? No. So I'll just use my lasso tool and cut. I'm just filling all of the colors in that I want. So we've got some yellows, we've got some oranges, and that's because when you're in space, you want to be easily seen. You can look at some references for this. And again, like there's a gap right here. So to take care of that gap, I'm holding down the Shift key using my regular lasso tool and adding that to my selection. So let's see, what color should I make that? Well, I don't know. I'm going to go to my base color layer, Command J to isolate that selection, Command U. Purple will blend in too much. But I'm kind of digging that green. And this is what happens. You're working on it, you kind of start to experiment and play with things. It's a totally normal part of the process. All right, so I got these little areas here that I need to select the stripes. I'm going to make those green to repeat that color element on the suit. I'll fill whatever gaps I'm working on. This will also be green. And then now I've got a little bit of that green that I don't want for her binoculars. So I'll go back to my base layer. In fact, what I can do is select the entire binoculars, Command J, Command U. I can make them darker, and give them a little bit more of a greenish tint. And then for all these other elements here, if you're adding decals or decals, some people can't pronounce it decals. I pronounce it decals. How do you pronounce it? Let me know in the comments below. I pronounce it decals, decals. Now I'm saying it wrong. So let's go ahead and tone down the lipstick a little bit. So I'm going from more general colors to more specific colors. And I think that's a good strategy to follow. You're not getting lost in the weeds. Command J, Command U. Let's give her a brownish tint. Let's fill in some of these colors. And then we'll add some white, because the eyes always go to the eyes that are in a composition. And now I've got all these other extra elements here that I can finish up. I want to make the flashlight or this equipment, this device here, a different color. just so that it stands out and also creates a point of interest. And for our little bear guy, there's a couple of open gaps here, but let's think, I want a color that's going to complement this without making the bear look like it's just an attachment on the girl. So I'll make his suit blue. And I'll give him some dark blue gloves. He's a character that is the, I guess, sidekick. And so he's important, but the focus is they're both looking at something on the right. That's where the viewer will look. The viewer looks where the director tells them to look. And he's got these orange shades. And here's another little bonus trick here too. If you want to color something really tiny, but you don't want to use the selection tool, go to the layer underneath your existing colors, use the lasso tool, and then we're going to switch that to white by hitting X. Boom. So you can be very imprecise with your selections and get away with it. All right, so now I've got that. Let's take care of the other stuff here. So this camera, Command J, Command U. Let's give that some interesting, let's make those bright red. And these are going to be some lights that are going to be on her character. So I'm just really trying to repeat these color schemes. First of all, you don't want to use every color in the rainbow because you can. You want to be very deliberate with your color usage. Use too many colors, then it kind of dilutes what you're looking at. All right, now what about these hoses and all the other elements that could be part of the same color scheme? I can just use my lasso tool, go to my base layer, Command J, Command U, and let's make that stuff kind of a yeah, that'll work. I want it to be darker than some of the other elements, but I don't want it to be so dark that it blends in with the space background. Okay, so what are some other elements that I need to think about here too? Well, again, this is my color flat stage. Thinking about narrative. So maybe this is going to be a blue screen. Maybe she's got her, I'll make that green, only because there's a lot of turquoise colors here. Make that stand out. She's got some tools. And so now I've got a strong focal point, not only through the layout, but also through my colors. I have my foreground, my midground, my background. I've got something that I can now work with. In the next video, you'll see more of the flats already put in, and I'll focus on adding some highlights and shading, establishing a light source, etc. So I'll see you in that video. You'll see this updated a little bit, but I'm basically utilizing the same techniques that I've already discussed. So thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.